Good morning. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing, and my guest I'm delighted to have aboard today, Stephen Hoffman, aka Captain Hoff. Stephen, hi and welcome.
Matthew, it's great to be here.
Yeah, if I read your whole bio, we won't even have time to talk because you've had such a fascinating career. But CEO of Founder Space now, so you work with hundreds and hundreds of startups. Author of multiple books, including a new one that just came out. Correct?
Yep,
What
surviving a startup.
surviving a startup, which you've done yourself
Yes,
multiple
I've done it
times,
multiple times. I've done 3 venture-funded startups, 2 bootstrap startups.
and you're still around this fascinating world. Why?
I don't know because
Yeah,
now I'm actually helping other startups to
yeah,
survive. That's
yeah,
my mission.
yeah. Passing on some wisdom and experience and connecting people a bunch. I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a profligate networker.
A
I
profligate
network.
network.
I network constantly.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
that's that's one of the more valuable skills in life, isn't it?
Actually, before the pandemic, I
Yeah.
was traveling 70% of the time. So I was all over the world because we have partners in 22 countries. So
Right,
I
right.
was just
22. Wow.
yes.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, having read up a bit on Founder Space and on you, one of the top of mind questions to me was because you've been at this working with founders and in the startup domain um, for a long time, and it seems like it's gotten hip and sexy and all sorts of stuff relatively recently. How do you feel about that?
Well, it has exploded
Yeah,
recently. And,
yeah.
it's been on an upward trajectory for a long, long time. So I got in before the dot-com boom,
Mm-hmm,
before the dot-com bubble burst,
mm-hmm.
before, any of this stuff happened. I got I actually did my first startup in the early 90s, believe it or
Wow.
not.
Tell me about
And
it.
yeah, and it was a startup called LavaMind. And
Okay.
my mission at LavaMind was actually, ironically, to teach entrepreneurs, to teach people to be entrepreneurial. But we did it through games. So our
Nice.
first game was called Gazillionaire, and it was designed to be super fun, which it
Mm-hmm.
was, and actually introduce people to business, how you do business, supply and demand, loans, interest rates, all the different things people need to know. And that game, it got picked up by the largest PC game publisher at the time. I funded it entirely myself. It was entirely bootstrapped and became a big
Wow.
hit. And
Wow.
it's still available today, decades later on
Decades
Steam.
later.
Yeah, it's still selling, has fans.
I've got 2 sons. I end up mentioning them more often than not, just because, because I love them. And they like a game from the '90s called Age of Empires.
I love that.
Right.
Yes, I'm
And
a huge
and
fan of that.
we've talked about it a ton of times. It's like great game design has nothing to do with the technology it's running on. It's great game design.
Yes, and that's what this was.
Yeah, sounds like
We
it.
put a lot of work into the game design, actually, because I had to self-fund it.
Yeah,
It wasn't the most high-tech game out there at the time, but that actually made it last longer because it wasn't
interesting.
about the technology. It was about the crazy art, the crazy ideas. It's really humorous.
Yeah,
Your kids, if you want them to learn something about business, have them play Gazillionaire.
haven't played Gazillionaire.
Yeah, they'll become gazillionaires someday.
Someday.
That's the promise.
What was the one they did spend a little time on Zoo Tycoon at one point, and I thought that was actually
Yeah.
that was a decent introduction to the sort of checks and balances involved
Yes. Yeah,
in
there are
in
a lot of
making.
these business games out there that are some of them really, really fun.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have to tell you, back in the 90s, early 90s, I experimented with email marketing.
Did you really?
Yes, in the early days, I remember there were no email
No
marketing
email
services
marketing.
out there.
Yeah,
You
no.
literally had to use the thing called listserv
Mm-hmm.
on your ISP. So
Mm-hmm.
this dates me, but pre-internet days, this is what people did.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You and I have what we share the having been around this long enough to talk about the roots, which actually still affect how things work today. I have to say, I talk with a lot of people in the email marketing world, and they're like, "Oh, I've been at this for 15 years." I'm like, "That's nothing." Like, some of us were doing email before it was SMTP, and some of us were doing email in the days of listserv, and yeah, wow, that's a ways back. what's your read on how email has shifted? I mean, it was designed as a point-to-point, person-to-person, or maybe person-to-group medium, and we use it for everything, including marketing now. Does that surprise you?
Not at all, because
No?
even in the early days, I was like, well, if I can email people and let them know we have an update for our game,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
they'll respond, and they'll may buy our next game when we let them know. So absolutely, it has been there since the beginning,
yeah,
really,
yeah,
since the
yeah,
beginning, because it makes so much sense.
yeah.
And I remember when Constant Contact was on the rise. They were one of
Yep.
the earlier
Early
ones,
Yep.
and I adopted them and used them, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. This is what every business needs.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we're getting to the point, arguably almost every business is doing some of that. And at the same time, I'm betting you end up saying to some of the startups that you coach, you need to pay attention to building your email list,
I
correct?
told them, I mean, just the other week, I'm working with this startup and I'm like, are you collecting email addresses? And they're
Yeah.
like, no. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Like every startup has to be doing this from like day one. Like
Yeah.
every contact you make is valuable, and
Yeah.
you can use that, and you want to keep them update, and you might want to have more than one list targeted at specific, your partners, your customers, different groups.
Yeah. 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 And I agree, I'm in complete agreement with you. But when you talk to someone who's, either new to their business or, stepped out of a corporate job or whatever, and you try and convince them of that, there's so many other shiny toys asking for their attention. Why is the email list one of the things that you single out as focus on this and do this?
Well, for a number of reasons, because social media is so crowded, you can't rely on it to get through to customers. You just can't. I mean, you can get on there if you want to spend a lot of money on ads, you could do that potentially. But, repeat customers, people have engaged with you. They won't always see your posts on your feed.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them, like Twitter and all these things that in Facebook, they're just so crowded. And there's an algorithm now that, it filters out. So you don't know, if it's reaching the right people on there. But with email marketing, you'll know they'll get it, and you
Yeah.
can track that. And you can look at the analytics and see how many people are opening and who's opening. You have a lot of power there that you don't have on these other platforms.
And you do your ability to hang on to that list, like the big spreadsheet you mentioned.
Yeah,
Like that's in your control.
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet, but that's for tracking my stuff. I also have separate email marketing lists,
Sure.
which are up there. And then, we have over 100,000 people on our email marketing list,
Wow.
entrepreneurs who signed up at Founderspace. And it's great because every time, we want to reach out to them, and we reach out, we've always debated, and I'm sure you've discussed this many times, how many times you send them email so that they don't get sick of it, right?
Yeah.
You want to maximize, you want to hit that maximum where it's not too few, where you're underutilizing it. It's not too many. So we sort of settled on bi-monthly because for us, that seems to work. I don't know what your experience is, but that's ours.
Yeah, that seems it is hard to balance that top of mind versus bottom of the trash can act. And I know that seeing messages from someone, even if I don't read them, affects how I will treat the next one. So that does sound like a really like healthy and sustainable. Like you can actually find something interesting to say every other week, right?
Yeah. So every other week we have new content, and when we do our lists, we are really focused on providing value. I mean, we're not focused on sell, because if we're focused on sell, nobody wants to be sold to unless it's a store and they subscribe to it just to get the coupons, right? The discounts, the sales. Well, then you focus on selling. But I see a lot of these stores out there that make a big mistake. So like, I'm really focused, like, they should segment it more, because like, if I'm interested in Samsung and I want, just their phones, I don't want to receive stuff about the big screen TVs and other gadgets, because I'm just interested in the sale on their next phone. And a lot of times I see this more often than not. So I will sign up, like, I want this new phone, then I want to know when the next phone goes on sale, and I want it, and because I'm thinking of buying it, but I don't want any other emails. There should be an option for that, because what ends up happening is they just start sending me all these other electronic products, which I have absolutely no interest in. Right. So I unsubscribe, and I never get alerted when that phone goes on sale.
Right.
Like, so they end up missing that opportunity. that's a little segue off to the, it's a tangent I went on. But in our marketing list, I was talking about value. So when we go out there, we're engaging with entrepreneurs. They have lots of questions, they're always needing to know about something. So when we go out there, every email and every post we have on there is about how can we provide them more value? How can we give them something so that they not only don't unsubscribe, but they actually share that with other friends. They're like, wow, this is so useful. So that is, so what we do, and there are different types of value you can give them. So we like there's two types. One is kind of content that they can consume that really, experts that can help them with their business. So we feature these experts that help them with their business. The other form is actionable items. Like, let's say they're looking for venture funding and there's a pitch contest. They want to know about that. Let's say there's a networking opportunity where they can, meet other entrepreneurs. They want to know about that. So we're really selective about going through and only featuring those things that they can act upon right away, that will make a difference in their business, or that will help, educate them and propel them further.
Right. So you really steward that channel.
Yes.
And I'm going to guess it pays off. You don't get to 100,000 without having respected people's time and added value.
Yeah. And that's been, and a lot of people, this has been a dilemma for us, because a lot of people approach us and they'll say, well, we want to email your list with our whatever. They're one of our partners. And so we want to do business with them. Like, they have a conference and they're like, we want a dedicated email about our conference to your community. And we're like, well, we always say, well, we have a policy of just sending out 2 a month, and we're willing to include you in one of those 2 email newsletters, but we can't just spam our our mailing list. Like, they don't want to hear about every conference that approaches us, or every, partner who has something to sell. So, if it's of value to them, we will include it in our newsletter, but we won't do the one-offs. And I know there's a trade-off, because we've missed out on a lot of opportunities to do cross promotions with them, because we won't do that.
Yeah. Well, that's it's a good way of keeping yourself honest, right? Sticking to that, really, it's an editorial calendar in a sense.
And we never sell or share those email addresses. So we really loathe when that happens.
Well, back to your example for a sec about, electronics manufacturer doesn't pay attention to your specific interest in this moment where we're starting to ask more questions about privacy and control of data. We've got this choke point that's a difficult thing to navigate on both sides. Do I want the companies I agree to hear from to be more accurate, targeted, whatever in their communication? Sure. How much time will I invest in telling them that? Open question. How good are they at keeping track of it? Massively open question. And it doesn't surprise me that most, if not all of us, fumble that ball pretty badly. Like, I get emails from many, many, many companies, and like a lot of them are just blind. There's one, I pick on them a lot, outdoor goods retailer that I've subscribed to for a decade, and I've bought thousands worth of dollars of stuff from, right? They still don't know what I'm into. And I would think my purchases, if nothing else, would be a really clear indicator.
So this is a huge, if you're a startup out there, a huge entrepreneurial opportunity. Can you take AI and actually integrate it with the web browsing that they do, the data that you gather on this outdoor site, the purchases you've made, and actually tailor the email marketing just to the items that you're interested in. Right. Yeah. So if they know you're big into backpacking, they can send you backpacking stuff. But if you're not into soccer or tennis, there's no reason to give you the latest tennis racket 50% off, because the chance are it's just spammed you. Right. So the real goal is, how do you make email marketing of value to people, right? How do you, then it's great. One of the things that killed me, though, is when Google made that separate tab where they shove all the
tab. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, because it makes it much harder to reach people. But I understand why Google did that, because so much of this email, as we're talking about, is really untargeted.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nominal reason to do it was better for Gmail subscribers. I I wonder whether they asked or whether they decided and then said it was a good thing, kind of like Apple's recent move with mail privacy. Did they ask,
Yes.
or was it good for them to do it? And everyone said, yeah, based on the short rationale given.
Yeah. So I'm just talking from an email marketer perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
from our perspective, we want more open. So
Yeah.
we don't want
Everybody
it
does.
put on another tab where people can just mass delete it without seeing,
Yeah.
what we have to say.
Well, and you wouldn't want a message from Founder Space to to one of the 100,000 entrepreneurs on your list to land in the promotions tab. You don't want a promotions relationship. You're not sending promotions
Well,
content.
exactly. But
Yeah.
that's what's happening. So
Yeah, interesting. And it's very hard to get out of that because the rules aren't very clear.
right. You can't really, I don't know. And I don't know if you know, like how to make sure you're not in the promotions tab or have people unselect you from that.
Yeah.
That would be a good question. I don't even know if it's possible.
There are companies and there are people with the expertise to try to help with that. Nobody, as far as I know, has a bulletproof formula to make it work. And like like the secret sauce in SEO, I don't think Google's about to say, "Here's the playbook for how to get out of the promotions tab."
Yeah, right, because
we'd all use it.
Yes, and there would be no reason for a promotions
Right,
tab.
there'd be no reason for it as well. Well, I'm delighted to hear that you're banging the drum for the continued role of email and a list and of responsible communication through that channel with the startups and entrepreneurs you coach.
As an investor, as a venture investor, as
Yeah.
working with all these startups, I do see that opportunity for companies that will come out with really refined AI-driven email marketing, like that will completely integrate all of your interactions with that company,
Yeah.
all the data they gather with the content
Yeah.
that is right for you,
Yeah.
that will dramatically increase the open rate and the engagement on those emails.
Yeah, there are a handful of companies that are doing that kind of thing, but I think it'd be fair to say that the majority of email platforms just they're nowhere near that yet. They're so busy with speeds, feeds, sends, deliverability stuff.
Right. They have their hands full.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it's only a matter of time. Like
Yeah,
before
agreed. Yeah.
it rolls out, it's at the beginning stages. So we're
Yeah.
going to see that, and we're going to see different effectiveness. Like there'll be one company that really breaks through
Yeah.
with something that's just amazing, and then everybody will jump on that.
Yeah, Blue Shift is doing some really good stuff in that regard. The other challenge, of course, is that sort of crossing over of the silos, right? You've got your e-commerce silo and your email silo, and you're trying to figure out how to make them behave like they're the same beastie, and that's not trivial. I wouldn't be surprised if, as closely as you see Klaviyo and Shopify working and overlapping in market share, I wouldn't be surprised to see them try and move in that direction, like that. And Shopify store not necessarily the same number of SKUs to manage, so it's a more finite problem, at least out of the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Shopify would be great.
Shift gears since we get to pick your brain for a little bit. Tell me a bit about what I know. Founder Space has sort of a whole number of tiers of programs, but broadly speaking, tell me about the things that you guys do for people going down this hard road of startup.
So we do a lot. So basically, we are an incubator and accelerator, meaning incubation, we work with earlier stage startups, sometimes just at the idea level. Acceleration is where we really invest money and time to startups that actually have traction. They're going. They have a great team, they have a product, they're figuring it out. And what they tend to need most of all is our insight, like into whether they're on the right path, things that they could improve on, pitfalls that they need to avoid, and capital. They need to raise capital because they're at that growth area. So we engage with both, and we offer different types of programs for each one. So at the earlier stage, it tends to be more educational programs. Like we have lots of content on our site. We run events. We do, Zoom gatherings and interviews and all this stuff, content for them, because they need to learn. Once they kind of figure it out, that's where we come in with the money, the time, the expertise to really push them faster.
And you help connect them with investors in terms of that pursuit of capital, right?
And teach them, and I write a lot about this in my book, Surviving a Startup, really teach them the ins and outs of what investors are looking for.
Yeah.
And also how to email investors. Like, honestly, how, because a lot of a cold email, like what works in a cold email. And I can tell you right now, like if your audience is out there and you want to write a cold email and get to somebody, first of all, it pays to be concise, because I know in the cold emails I get, if they're paragraphs, I read the first couple sentences and the last couple sentences. So if there are paragraphs and paragraphs of information, unless it's from somebody who if it's cold, I just don't read it. Right. I like what, so tell the people what you want right away. Like they have to put, if it's cold, they have to know in context. So if you're raising funding, tell them I am raising capital. And then immediately in like one sentence, sum up your business. Like, what is your business? What do you do? Who are your customers? You can put it in a sentence for almost every great business out there.
Right.
And then after that, I usually say, put 3 bullet points, because people love bullet points. They don't want to read, and highlight 3 incredible things about your business. Like, we just hit, 100,000 customers. We just won this award. We just, closed 7 new deals, whatever it is. Put these 3 bullet points in there, and then put a link to your, ideally, a video, because nobody likes to read a video, and say, watch this. And in the video, literally, it's you talking like you're the CEO, and you're showing them your product, like what your product is, and why customers are going crazy over this product. That's almost all you need for a cold email to an investor. And it works. If you don't have a great video, if you don't want to produce one or whatever, you can put a link to your investor deck. And keep a short investor deck, 12 to 15 slides that are very visual, with little text that they can click through really fast. And even if you send them your video, they may ask for your investor deck, but that's great. I mean, what you want to do is engage them in a back and forth dialogue, and then as quickly as possible, move to setting up a meeting. Right. Either a Zoom meeting or in-person meeting, depending on things, but you want to get face-to-face with that.
That is terrific advice. I want to excerpt this chunk of our conversation and go, wait, pay attention to this if you're on the hunt for funding. There's one thing implicit in the points you just made about bullets. You focused on quantification in 2 out of the 3 that you mentioned, which I think is great advice. Our eyes go to numbers. An investor, almost by definition, is looking for they meaningful quantification.
Yeah, they want real things. We call it traction, is data. Like, what is your user growth? Data. Our user growth is growing X month to month. What is, they want to see that, we're getting this much. If you have that, if you're pre-revenue, if you're early stage, you put what you have. But yes, numbers speak louder than words.
Numbers speak louder than words. Yeah. Especially in a brief cold email, numbers really kind of jump off the page, don't they? Yeah. Different perspective on numbers. You mentioned that you lived through the .com boom, and I was around going, wow, this looks like a bad idea. And now we're in a boom that just leaves me baffled.
It is either the most incredible boom in history or the most incredible bubble in history, or both. Yeah. But you look at the world today, and every day I open, I consume lots of information. So I'm out there, in the blockchain world, the crypto world, NFTs, like shooting through the roof. And, people, like I just saw yesterday, there is an NFT, basically a non-fungible token on the blockchain, of a picture of somebody's kid making a smile, sold for $71,000. Like, it's somebody's kid making a smile.
Yeah.
A random kid.
Yeah.
Not famous, and $71,000. Something's wrong there.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this what's the famous Holland?
It's funny money.
What's the famous example in Holland when flower?
Yeah, the tulip.
The tulips. Yeah. Is
Tulip
this
mania?
Digital tulips we're dealing with here?
Yeah, we are literally. It's tulip mania all over again, because these, when people are buying an NFT, and people don't even understand what they are, they just think they can speculate on it. Just like a tulip, it didn't matter what it was. If you can get the next guy to pay more than you, double you, why not buy it? So that's what they're doing. They're buying it and they're trying to flip these things. And the crazier the thing they buy, the more press it gets. Like this thing got a lot of press. So I'm sure there's another person in line to buy it for double because it was so ridiculous. It's in fact, the more ridiculous it is, the more press you can actually get, the more value you actually create, which has no correlation to reality, right? In the sense of this thing actually has a worth or utility for somebody.
Worth. I'm really glad you said that. That particular aspect of what's happening broadly does seem quite bubbly.
We are living in a meme-driven bubble. Like if we had to go back in time, this is like a meme-driven bubble, right? These things propagate on the internet, and most of the NFTs and things like that are literally selling because of memes. And if you look at even these cryptocurrencies, a lot of them, Dogecoin is a joke, right? It was a joke currency. It's now worth an incredible, billions of dollars. The founder sold it off to buy a Honda Civic. Now it's worth more than the Honda Motor Company. So nice. he sold off all his Dogecoin because he knew it was a joke. And he go, wow, I can buy a car with this. Pretty cool. If he had held it, he would be worth more than the Honda Motor Company. But, where is reality here? We don't quite know. Now, it's not to say there isn't value in some of these things, and NFTs and cryptocurrency. I'm not like totally like negative on them. I think there's value. I just think there's massive speculation going on.
Yeah. Particularly that corner of the world. There's also a lot of there's also an explosion in sort of conventional investing, right? Venture firms have more funds than they've had ever by big.
They are drowning in capital. And that's why you see the valuations in Silicon Valley are higher than ever, like astronomical. Like I was working with the startup the other day, and I'm fairly conservative and I know the company, and I was like, well, your company's probably a 4 million pre-money valuation and you should raise $1 million, and so put it at 5 million post at your stage. It's really early, and we talked to this lawyer, one of the lawyers I work closely with, and he's like, no, this is probably 10 million like valuation or 12. And I'm like, that is crazy. Wow. So just recently, the values have been shooting up and up and up. And when when that's happening, first of all, if the values are too high for early stage investors, really hard to make a good multiple. Like it's just because most of these startups aren't going to make it. And a few will, and you get diluted along the way pretty massively as these startups grow towards unicorns. So things are a little out of whack. They are out of whack, and they will adjust. I tell you, there will be the problem is that literally the Fed has kept interest rates so low for so long, and the banks have been given permission, and you can go look this up, to really lend money like crazy without any limits. Like they used to have limits, like there were protections that a bank could only, they had to have certain amounts of capital reserve. They basically took those away. So the banks, like the more money they lend, the more money they make. So if the bank, the directors of those banks, they get paid, they get bonuses based on growth. So their personal pocketbook, they're incentivized to push out the loans. We're just seeing not just the Fed, but the whole financial system, on overdrive, flooding the economy with money. And where does this money go? It drives up all of these investments. There will come up a day of reckoning, and we will see a correction, and that's just natural.
No, I tend to agree. And my hope, broad sort of sociocultural hope, would be that we get some good, valuable, useful experiments out of the many that aren't necessarily going to make the curve, right? We want businesses that innovate, that change the world for us, to come out of that mix. They're not all going to be.
They're not all going to be, but there will be. There will be a lot of the next Googles and Facebooks of the future are coming out right now. So there's a lot of good investment. There are a lot of good, if you invest, like I'm an investor, right? So I'm like, if you invest in a great company that provides exceptional value to the customers over the long term, you probably won't lose money, even if there's a crash, because that company will rebound. But if you're investing in one of these things where you really can't understand the value and you're just doing it because everybody else is doing it, that is extremely risky.
Right. But you should do that consciously, knowing that you've got a good chance of losing the whole thing.
Yeah, you might make money. I mean, people have been making money, but those things don't go forever.
Well, the other thing I say to, when I talk to, other people who are entrepreneurs or founders who are thinking about a startup, right, is you got to assume that investors are better at investing than you are, right? Like the guy who does this all day, like you, has more experience at it, has done more of it, you have structures in your head, you know how to size things up. Even you're surprised by valuations, which is really interesting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So even I mean, if you aren't sensitive to valuations, you're fooling yourself. At the end of the day, valuations determine a lot. You can only get so many multiples. Now we've seen these unicorns going sky high. So even at high valuations, people are making money. But that might not continue forever. So and not all companies hit those valuations. The ones that make the headlines do. There's a lot of companies out there who never, quite don't even come close to it. So I'm a venture investor. I work with hundreds of venture capitalists around the world. We have a portfolio strategy. Literally, the model for venture capital is that when we are looking at startups, we look at every startup to be what we call a fund maker. And a fund maker is that one startup in your portfolio of 10 or 20 companies that just goes ballistic, that goes exponential growth through the roof. And that startup is usually worth more than all the other startups combined, significantly more. So every arrow in our quiver, is aimed, at a fund maker. And now most of them don't turn out that way, but we need one in there because that returns the whole fund. That, gives you the multiples you need. So that is, as an investor, it's a portfolio strategy. As an individual, you need to look at it the same way, because you're not gonna hit, you're not gonna make all great investments. You need to average it out across a lot of different startups. And every one of these startups, if you're a smart investor, you're probing deep. You're probing like, what does a startup have? Like, is their model truly scalable? Like, do they have a potential to be one of these huge companies? And when I look at companies, like I have all these criteria that I look at. I want to see a startup. First of all, if you're doing something incrementally better than everybody else out there, you've lost the game. You're never going to be this fund maker. You're never going to be a unicorn. Incrementally better, nobody switches. Like if you're using an email marketing platform and you're, already integrated with it, and another one comes out and they have a few extra features, so what? Like there's no way it's worth the work. But if somebody comes out and they're exponentially better, 2 or 3 times better, you're like, it's worth the hassle.
Worth switching.
The only other way is that the whatever company out there provides a different value, like a fundamentally different value. That I look at the world and there are new pockets of demand emerging all the time, like in the world. Underneath, they're sort of like volcanoes ready to explode, or oil, like a pent-up oil ready to have a gusher. And the entrepreneurs out there, really good entrepreneurs, they don't just dream up products, they hunt for demand. They are looking for the demand. When they find that demand, people need this thing. They need this thing. Like we were just talking about now. Like if we had a way where you could get better quality emails, right? You would jump on board in funding that company or using that product, because you'd be like, well, if they could really target these emails and get that data and make it simple and the whole process, the integration process simple, I would jump on that. If there's that demand out there, the great entrepreneurs first identify the demand, then come up with the idea for, how do we meet this demand? What new technologies, what new design, business process innovations can we put to actually meet this demand in a way nobody else has? And that creates a new value. Boom, you have one of these unicorns.
Now, but implicit in portfolio strategy, you'd want to have your filter set to try to find as many fund makers as possible, right? In theory, everyone you say yes to, you think could be.
They have to be, because if you tell me I'm going to have a linear growth company, I'm not interested, because first of all, I may never get my money out of that company. Most linear growth companies never sell. And if there is an exit, it's not for the multiples that would make any sense for the risk I'm taking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're looking for companies that will grow exponentially, either be acquired or IPO. Like, it's that simple. And so there's 98% of the business out there are not exponential growth companies. They are linear growth companies. They may transform at some point into an exponential, but they aren't right now. And we have to filter all of those out.
Yeah. Which explains why I think it is about 2% of companies that go looking for funding get funding.
Yeah. Because those are the ones that meet our criteria. The other thing we really love, and you can probably relate to this, is recurring revenue. Like, honestly, if you look at the great businesses out there, like the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles, the you name it, Microsofts, Apple, they all, once they get a customer, right, they don't, that customer just doesn't disappear. Like, they don't sell a product to them once. They literally are selling them over, and every time that customer engages, they're making more money, whether it's in ads on Facebook or purchases on Amazon. They are getting a little bit of money over a long period of time for that customer, which adds up to a lot of money. The only time you can get like unicorns that do one-time sales and you don't see that customer again for 10 years or whatever is if it's a big ticket item, like a car. Like, if it's a car, there's enough profit margin in there that you can literally take that profit and go out and acquire a lot more customers. And that's what it's all about, the cycle, right? Email marketing being part of it, right? This cycle of acquiring more customers. And then once you get those customers, locking them in to whatever your platform, whatever you have, your service, and never letting them go. Keep providing more value than anybody else. And in return, they will reward you with more revenue.
Right. Well, and one of the things about, we're in the middle of this ginormous shift to a more and more digital economy, and we all got our butts booted 6 to 10 years forward by the pandemic. Switching costs are different in the digital domain than in the analog physical domain. It's one thing to say, I'm going to drop Netflix and subscribe to Hulu. It's a different thing to say, I'm going to, sell my Jeep, never, and buy a fill in the blanks instead. I mean, it like shorter life cycles in the digital domain. It's harder to hang on to customers.
It is much harder. And that's the other factor. So not just recurring revenue, but how do you lock them in? How do you make it so that this customer will never leave? And there's few different strategies for this. So one of the strategies is you make that customer integrate with you to a degree that it's really painful to move. So email marketing platforms, like once you're up and vetted, to actually move those email addresses to another platform, and then you have to get everybody to re-accept them, right? And that re-accepting means a lot of them will drop off.
Lose them,
you're locked in, like you're paying a huge switching cost, right? That on this marketing list. So that makes it much harder to switch email platforms and other things, right? Then a Netflix is easy, cancel, go to another one.
Right.
The other one is that so sometimes you can do that, and with SaaS platforms that need to be integrated, the more deep integration to usually it's to large companies, enterprise companies. They like Oracle's surviving because literally people can't extricate themselves from Oracle.
Right.
The other way is to create a really robust ecosystem. So even though it's easy for them to switch from your product, it's hard. Nobody else can replicate your ecosystem. Let me give you an example. Salesforce, right? Salesforce's product, their CRM product, it's decent, but it isn't the best at everything. It's kind of bulky. It's it still has a lot of legacy stuff, not the easiest to use. And there's other solutions out there that are leaner, faster, cheaper. But you don't get the ecosystem of Salesforce. So when you're in Salesforce, you start using all these third-party applications and stuff. And before you know it, none of them, once you use enough of them, they're never all going to be available on somewhere else. So you're going to have to give up something that you have become that is really valuable to you, locking you into Salesforce.
I mean, arguably that's Microsoft played that strategy really well in the 90s, right? Like once you became a Microsoft shop, it was easier to just stay.
Right. So exactly. And then there's a third way. So there are three fundamental ways. And that is, a Netflix, let's say, or an Amazon, literally provide more value than other services. Right.
Yeah.
So in a Netflix, you could, it's so easy to switch out of Netflix, but
Wow.
they have this content there, and that's why they invested so much in content, because they're like, the content is what will keep people with us. If we have the hit shows, they saw HBO did that, was the first
Yeah.
one to
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
pioneer that in a big way.
Yeah.
And so, but HBO sort of they could have been the Netflix of the world. They
Yep.
just didn't move fast enough.
Yep.
Netflix became Netflix, and there's still competition, right?
Yeah,
Disney
there
Plus is
is.
gaining
Yep.
steam. There's Hulu,
Yep.
but it's not as good a moat around you
Right.
as other ones, but it's worked. Amazon, they have an even better moat, because they have what's called a marketplace, and a marketplace means it has a network effect, like Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more buyers there are, the more sellers come. The more sellers on there, the more value to the buyers. They're if everybody participating in your network, like all your friends on Facebook contributing their content, that keeps you there, because you can't replicate that. You can't bring them.
Yeah.
It's very hard for somebody else to offer that degree once they become a market leader.
Yeah.
So there are all these different ways that people are using to lock in customers.
Yeah. This just occurred to me as you were saying that, but being both an longtime Amazon Prime guy and a longtime Netflix subscriber, there's a little nuance difference. Just focus on Amazon Prime Video for a second. I've got stuff I've actually bought on Amazon Prime. And if I ever thought about switching, I'd be like, oh, but I bought this and I bought that, and I've got this perception of ownership that keeps me hooked in. And Netflix, to date, has not played that card yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, that Amazon has and Netflix hasn't.
Yeah.
I don't, you could probably still access your content even if you stopped paying for Amazon
Yeah,
Prime,
I mean,
because you purchased that, you own that. So
yeah.
I don't think that's linked to the Prime subscription. But Amazon, so I don't think that's as big a deal for people, because you could just go off and subscribe to Hulu and cancel your Prime subscription and still get the stuff you bought.
Get the stuff you bought.
What Jeff Bezos did was so smart, is he said, we are literally going to provide more value to our customers than anybody else. Yeah. And he started on day one, like when he started doing his online bookstore, he made it easy to return products. Like, I remember, we were talking about history, right? Back in the early days of Amazon, other on e-commerce sites, you had to search. They made it as hard as possible to return a product because they didn't want to lose money. So every time they get a return, they were losing money. So they would make you jump through all these hoops. Amazon took the opposite approach. Let's make this as easy as possible. Yes, we're going to lose money in the short run, but what ended up happening, and this is Jeff Bezos's genius, is that people would stick with Amazon and they would buy more products because they aren't afraid of returning. So he continually did this with shipping, 2-day shipping. He was pioneering that. He did, the whole infrastructure of Amazon is geared towards efficiency. Everything he does in Prime, he says, you subscribe to Prime, you get Amazon Prime for free. You get all these freebies using Amazon that other people can't match. His whole goal was like, how can I lock you in? He's locking you in more, not because it's not easy to buy from another e-commerce site, because it is, but because Amazon provides you so much value.
Yeah. And they'd rather gain the customer, not worry about the return. My Amazon login, no baloney, is from 96.
Yeah, there you go.
Same login, same cotton picking sign on. It was, I happen to live in Seattle. Hey, there's this crazy guy who's selling books. I'm like, if it's books, like, sign me up. And, back in the day, right, when people were antsy as heck about e-commerce transactions, us early adopter types are like, it's fine, right? It'll be fine. Everyone's going to buy stuff this way eventually.
That's what I thought. I was like, people were so worried about giving out your credit card. I'm like, well, I could just, cancel. You're only like liable for $50 anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is it? What's the big deal about giving them my credit card? If I have to cancel it, I'll cancel it.
I'll cancel. Hey, I wanted to ask you something completely off topic, and thank you for all that words of wisdom about startup, man. This is going to be hopefully this is going to be a really helpful episode for some entrepreneurs out there who are going to build a unicorn. You jumped from the world of television to the world of tech. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, I've always been a creative guy. So when I was a kid, I was making movies all the time with my friends, and I made 50 movies by the time I graduated high school. I was, completely into building stuff and creating stuff. Mm-hmm. When I actually went and studied electrical computer engineering on my father's advice, because back in the old days, he was like, son, computers are going to change everything. You should study this. And I wasn't really into it, but I studied it. So I got an electrical computer engineering degree. And then I followed my dream. I went to graduate school at USC Film School.
Yep.
And I got my master's degree, went out into Hollywood. Literally nobody cared that I had a master's degree. It didn't make any difference. But, I did, in those days, we didn't have email. So it was pre-email days. Like the Hollywood execs didn't have it. So I literally wrote letters, and we're talking about cold letters. I wrote cold letters to 150 of the top Hollywood executives across the whole industry. And out of these kind of cold email or cold mail in these days, I got 3 responses. Like one response was from the head of Disney's production. Another response was from the producer of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. And a third response was from a television guy who had produced hundreds of TV movies and miniseries called Chuck Freeze in Hollywood. And I kind of blew the first 2 interviews, but I landed the third job. And quickly I rose up through the ranks of television, became this television development executive in Hollywood. It was like an amazing experience. And then I saw the future. Like, because I had this tech background, I was like, games are going to be bigger than TV. And nobody then even thought this, right? But I believed it because I understood. I was a gamer too. So I even like on my old Apple II, I was gaming. So I understood that games were going to be big. And at this point in time, Sega had just surpassed Nintendo as the #1 video game company in the world.
Right.
I met the founder of Sega, who happens to be an American. He was in the service in Japan after World War II, and it was called Service Games, Sega. And he met me and he says, we want to send somebody from Hollywood over there. And you have a background in technology and you love games and computer games. We want to send you there. So I went to their headquarters. I came up with all these ideas and worked with their teams on new projects. And then I got the startup itch. I was like, I can't start a company in Japan because Japan is too backwards for me to do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Silicon Valley, my home, and I'm going to launch a game company. And boom, we get back to Gazillionaire, where I launched my first company.
Right. Wow. What a ride. What a
Yes.
ride. Straddling those 2 worlds.
Yes. And it's been really fun.
What do you find similar and what do you find different about, let's call it the tech sector and the TV sector?
So there are more similarities and differences. And I noticed this very early on. So in the television entertainment sector, it's a hit-driven business. Like, they have what are called blockbusters, which are our unicorns.
I was going to say.
It's the same thing. And every studio, when they have a portfolio strategy, just like every venture capital, and they're hoping that every film that they greenlight becomes a blockbuster, because again, that's their unicorn, and that will make back all their money.
Yeah.
And somebody who went to film school, who saw all these great art films and foreign films and low budget films, it's a shame because those films, reach a niche audience, but that isn't what the studios are looking for. They want, and you can see it. Yeah. Why are half the movies superhero movies? Because they have proven that those movies attract viewers, not just in America now, it's a global business. So they want films that appeal to these action films, appeal across cultural boundaries, right? Because it's action, right? We all get it, they could, and particularly China. Like, China is a huge market. So when they make a film these days for the US audience, they are making it not for the US audience. They are making it for the US and the Chinese audience. Yeah. And then everybody else can consume it too. But those are the big mark. So this mentality and the way that Hollywood works and entertainment works, and the way that that's why today, if you want something that isn't as blockbuster-ish, you have to go to these services like Netflix, because they are able to target much more niche, right? And they are in television and cable channels, right? They are going much more niche. So that's why, in my mind, a lot of the best content today is, not in the theater. It doesn't. It originates from these other services. At least the content I like, right? Really different, interesting stuff. Yeah. So, but we've seen this this world, and just like VCs are looking at metrics and data when they look at these startups, like what will be successful, you know, but Netflix is extremely sophisticated, and this is their edge. You wanted to know like their edge. When I said it was creating the best content out there, it's how do they do that, right? They do that through big data. They are really good at analyzing their users' preferences and using that data to predict what they want next, what shows to fund, what, you know, and what's titles to acquire. So Netflix power is right now their big competitive advantage is basically AI and their data. It's and that determines what content they'll make and basically why people stick with them.
Well, and they get to run a closed self-enforcing or self-reinforcing loop is what you're saying. And I mean, arguably Amazon at a broader scale, different product set,
they're doing the same thing.
Terrific at the same thing. And, you know, I read once, Reed Hastings said something like, we're trying to make Netflix become HBO before HBO becomes Netflix. I think
exactly what he was doing.
I think was the quip. Yeah. And you're like, okay, HBO, some phenomenal content, some really gutsy calls on what to make, but tougher for them to compete if they don't have that.
Well, they didn't get in online early enough, so they couldn't they didn't get the data. Right. So Netflix first got the user base. But you know, HBO is great at producing content the old way, like just like executives. Like I was in that role, right? Green lighting, this should go, this shouldn't go. HBO was great at that, like phenomenal. They had a real talent there. But in today's world, you don't need that. You do not need humans in the loop. You can do it by algorithms. Algorithms are much more accurate.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, Google to wit, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
You can ask a friend where to search on the internet, like what would be a great place to go, or you can go to Google, and Google's going to win most of the time.
And Google's going to win most of the time, you know, faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're also on an amazing self-reinforcing loop ride. They're not gonna go away anytime soon.
So when we're looking at companies, to get back to that, we're looking at all that stuff. You know, where are they? Where are they positioned? Can they monopolize the data in this area and use it as a competitive advantage?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it does tend to say that there's a bit of a natural structure there. Not that's going to mean winners in a space, but not lots and lots of companies in a space, right? If you get
it's a winner take all world. Especially where, you know, scalable technology is concerned and data are concerned. Yes. And what I said, all these systems, these platforms are the reason the platforms are so successful, because they allow that company to be the winner and take it all. You know, I tell people out there, don't build a product, build a platform. Like, you know, products are the old way of doing things. You know, think of a platform, because that is what's going to allow you to become these unicorns.
Right. Wow. Well, Stephen, this was a wonderful conversation, as I expected.
Thank you.
If someone's listening and wants to find out more, they go to founderspace.com. Is that the best place to sort of hunt you down?
Super easy to reach. Founderspace.com. If they want a fun kind of video on how to raise venture capital, specifically going deeper, we have the 10 commandments of venture capital there. And I'll tell your audience, it's only available, you know, to people we tell where the secret URL is. But the secret URL is founderspace.com/10, either the number 10 or TEN. Either one will get you there.
Nice. Last thing, just a quick question. You're on, you said book number 3. Do you have another one in the works?
Yeah. So basically, here are the books. So I did Make Elephants Fly, which is all about how that elephant, that your big idea, you get it off the ground. Like, how do you get that big idea off the ground? Surviving a Startup came out this spring, and that is really about, you know, what we've been talking about. Like everything on the show we've been talking about, you know, how do you build a great business and survive? And then I had a new book actually just come out, which is called The 5 Forces That Change Everything. And this is about how technology, and if you're interested, we can have another episode on this, about how technology is going to transform every business on the planet and all of our lives. So everything from brain-computer interfaces, you know, hooking our brains directly to the internet, to genetic editing, you know, unraveling the source code of life and creating new plants and animals and how that will impact us, to nanotech, space travel, AI.
Wow. Okay, good. I'll put those on. I'll put all three of them on the stack.
Awesome.
Seriously. My guest, once again, because we're going to wrap it up and respect his time, has been Stephen Hoffman, aka Captain Hoff, from founderspace.com. Stephen, it's been a delight.
It has been my pleasure.
Let me just hit the stop here. Where is the stop?